So now we're going to kick off this conversation and talk about disability inclusion. There have been many advances in major policy and system reform in Victoria in recent years that aim to progress equality. How is this translating into greater inclusion for people with disability in mainstream service systems? This session will explore the impact of these reforms on disability inclusion, as well as the important role that disability advocacy plays in leveraging these opportunities to drive greater outcomes for people with disability. It wouldn't surprise you to know, particularly in this current climate, that we've had a few speaker changes throughout the day due to illness and other circumstances. Royal Island sends their apologies, however, delivering the keynote for Shiver Me Timbers, Advocacy and Inclusion in their place is the incredible Sam Drummond, Senior Policy and Research Officer at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. So please give a warm welcome to Sam.
All for having me. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land. And thank you, Tony, for your welcome to country. Pay my respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and also that Aboriginal people in this country are more likely to have a disability, and that this conference is more relevant to our First Nations people than just about any other people. So I want to acknowledge any Aboriginal people in this room today and commit myself, as I do every day, to listening to them and the solutions to the challenges that we face. My apologies that the Commissioner can't be here, but I think that's one of the things that has come out of COVID, is that if someone's sick, they have the power to say, I'm not going to be selfish about this. I'm going to respect everyone in the room, and I'm going to put someone in my place who I trust. So I'm very happy that Ro has trusted me to speak to you today. I don't think the Commissioner would mind me saying this, because I'm sure they would have said it as well. But Ro has dyslexia. And the way that these speech notes were written are much different for them than they would be for me delivering a keynote speech. So what I've got in front of me is some dot points, and then Ro riffs off them. It's not what I would have preferred, but all Ro said to me when they called me up was, just don't end up in the Herald Sun. We'll see how we go, but strap yourselves in. You'll notice I'm not in front of a lectern, and that's because you wouldn't see me. I was at my grandfather's funeral a couple of weeks ago and had the privilege in this old Catholic church to be able to speak at this old institution. And I didn't know whether they'd accept me because I hadn't done any of those ceremonies that would allow you to speak in a Catholic church, and definitely not at a funeral. But I stood up behind the lectern and nobody could see me. And it seemed just representative of how far we've got to come. And today is really about taking the lectern away for me and all the barriers that people in this room face and people who we're advocating for. So forgive me, but I don't have somewhere just neatly to put a few dot points that have been written for Ro. So I work every day in human rights. I've practiced as a discrimination lawyer and now work in the policy and research space at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, advocating for our laws to become fairer. I've seen, as many people in this room have, the discrimination that is faced by people with disability every day. So I just want to spend the next few moments and also the discussion that we're about to have in seeing what that looks like at the Victorian Human Rights Commission and how we can assist you to come to us to try and resolve that. Advocacy plays a critical role in upholding the rights of people with disabilities. And it also plays a role in safeguarding them from abuse, neglect, and other breaches of human rights. In Victoria, disability advocates have long been pivotal in championing human rights. And I think we all come from a long line of advocates and activists, and I'm really proud to be here in Victoria and speaking in this room with a lot of them. Disability advocacy is central to realising the principles outlined in our international human rights obligations, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and closer to home, Victoria's Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. Just to note there that we're currently advocating for a national Charter of Human Rights, and that's going through a parliamentary process. And if it happens, that will strengthen these human rights principles. But I want to start, I've already started, but start again by thanking everyone here for your tireless efforts in advocating for people with disabilities and yourselves as well. Getting a seat at the table is not always easy, but the advocacy sector's efforts have created important opportunities for people with disabilities to have a say in how they live their lives. But the unfortunate reality is that discrimination is an everyday experience for many people with disabilities. Disability discrimination year in, year out is the highest number of complaints that we get at the Commission. And that was the same in practice, as anyone who's worked in this area of law would know. And so we received just under 4,000 complaints at the Commission last year. About 35% of them were of disability discrimination. And I actually think, and you know, Julie will know that that's probably quite low compared to who's actually getting advice. Some of the cases that a typical case will be employment. So most of those cases are employment, but we also have a lot of goods and services, accommodation, education coming through as well. So we would see, here's a typical case that comes through to us. A man who suffered from an anxiety condition took leave of absence from his job. When he returned, his manager insisted on shadowing him in meetings, checking his outgoing emails and repeatedly checking in a way that felt intimidating rather than supportive. The man felt even more anxious about the additional scrutiny and decided to resign. Quite often, people will be forced to resign or they'll just be straight out sacked. I got a call from a woman last week whose son has ADHD and was told by the school that they wouldn't support him to go to VCE. They didn't have the facilities. And this happens every day. And these are the sort of complaints that we're getting. We want to connect at the Commission with organisations who are seeing this firsthand, who are seeing it every day. And our connection to disability advocates in this room and around the state is so important. When we receive a complaint from a person with a disability, we'll often make a warm referral to an appropriate service. And if you're a supporter advocate, if your service is keen to work with us, we'd love to connect, and you can contact our complaint service or contact me directly and I'll just put it through, and we go through our dispute resolution service and resolve a vast number of those complaints. What we hear from the community is that while there has been important progress on inclusion, there is much more to do. In the last few years, people with disability have been telling us the pandemic amplified and exacerbated existing inequality. The last few years have been particularly challenging for many people with a disability. Isolation, heightened risks to personal health and safety, increased strain on health resources, and the toll of such a long period of uncertainty has on your mental health and resilience. What I hear about through the complaints the Commission receives are the systemic barriers, physical and attitudinal, that limit opportunities for people with disabilities to participate. For public services, there's a need to prioritise not just accessible infrastructure, but also provision of information in accessible formats and training for frontline staff to support and engage with people with disabilities. Housing and healthcare are urgent priorities for many people with disability, as well as more responsive services to address violence and abuse that people with disability experience at disproportionate levels. The conversation about inclusive workplaces needs to shift from just providing a job for people with disability to providing them with a meaningful career where they can realise their potential. The time for people with disability to be paid less than the minimum wage is quickly coming to an end. Minimum wage should mean minimum, in my opinion, and we're worth that. Critical to all these goals is greater education for public sector workers, development of more effective policy shaped by people with disability, and investment in more responsive services so that every area of public life, people with disability can have their voice heard and be listened to. With the Disability Royal Commission drawing to a close on 15th of September, no doubt there will be much needed reflection on what needs to change to better empower people with disability to enable their advocates to support them. And critical to greater inclusion is stronger legal protections too. Last year, the Victorian government invited community input on the future of the Disability Act and the proposed creation of a new Disability Inclusion Act, including the establishment of a dedicated Disability Inclusion Commissioner. One of the key mechanisms in this proposed law is a duty for public sector organisations to actively promote disability inclusion. We believe that the inclusion of this duty could be a powerful tool for driving systemic change. This duty would pair well with the existing positive duty under the Equal Opportunity Act, which requires service providers, employers, and other organisations not just to deal with discrimination when it arises, but to take proactive steps to stop it from happening in the first place. One of the other critical ideas in the draft Disability Inclusion Act is giving the Disability Inclusion Commissioner enforcement powers regarding disability action plans. These enforcement powers create a really important incentive for relevant organisations to put effective policies in place to support inclusion of people with disability. At the Commission, we'll be watching closely to see what happens next with this Disability Inclusion Bill. And another important recent development was the creation of the Victorian Disability Worker Commission. This commission was established in 2019 to handle complaints about the quality of services for people with disability. I imagine that all the commissioners that have been set up in Victoria have like this little airport lounge of their own and they just talk to each other all the time. And so my commissioner was talking to the Victorian Disability Worker Commissioner, Dan Stubbs, and I can only imagine how the conversation went on. But I do know Dan Stubbs, when Ro Allen told him that they were speaking here today, that he wanted to emphasise the vital role of disability advocates can play in supporting people with disabilities to make complaints to their commissioner as well as to our commission. And if you have any concerns about the quality of disability services being delivered, Dan and his team would be very pleased to hear from you as well. And at the heart of it, doing things the way we've done will keep excluding many people with disabilities. There's a need for change, and I think everyone in this room knows that. We're heartened by the progress that's been made towards greater inclusion for people with disabilities and greater visibility. but I know many people with disability continue to face barriers to full participation in public life, whether it's in education, in employment or housing, or just going down the street to get a cup of coffee. Our vision for the future is a fairer, more inclusive community where people with disabilities are valued and recognised, where their voices can be heard and they can have a say in policies and decisions that affect them, where public sector organisations proactively strive for meaningful action to work to make reasonable adjustments and remove barriers like lecterns that may prevent people with disability from fully participating, where disability advocates are recognised for their efforts, adequately resourced and supported to build their capability and deliver their best work. And I think above that is just to lead a life that we love. And I think everyone in this room is committed to that, absolutely. And we've just got to keep strategically talking to each other so we can raise that within the wider community to decision makers. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we face as I get the 1 minute wrap up, is that nobody wants to say they're against disability policy. Nobody wants to say they're against reform in the disability space, but we really need action from the people who say that. And that's our biggest challenge going forward. So thanks very much for having me step in for the commission.